All right, do you want to talk a little bit about this All-Pro team? And I didn't see the All-Pro team. I saw midseason awards by our guy Gordon McGinnis.
Okay.
One of the almost originals at PFF.
Almost originals.
Him and I were hired full-time right around the same time, 2011, 2012. The MVP race that you love discussing there's no real consensus here. I don't think there's a real consensus for MVP. Gordon went with Lamar Jackson. We always talk about the quarterback being, the guy for MVP. If you just look at our highest graded quarterbacks or the most valuable quarterbacks using PFF WAR, you would land at guys like Lamar Jackson, 7-2 Ravens, Josh Allen, but his team's only 5-4. Sam.
Yeah.
You see, Patrick Mahomes is not having the same type of statistical season. They're 7-2, but it's far more of a defensive-driven effort by the Chiefs this year. Tua, who I think statistically is having maybe the best year, but they haven't done much against good teams. Honestly, Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff. Kirk Cousins before getting hurt would have probably been in the discussion, given what Minnesota's been doing. Jared Goff and the Lions. Trevor Lawrence maybe has a chance to get into the mix with the Jags, who are 6-2. Jalen Hurts with the Eagles because they're 7-1. But nobody on that list. It's like, man, this is a slam dunk. So Gordon went with Lamar Jackson here, which I get.
Yeah, there have been some people pointing out this season that the winner of MVP. So it's always, with all these awards, you have the question of who will win versus who should win. Either way this year, I think it's a question mark so far through the first half of the year. But people have been pointing out that the winner of MVP typically goes to somebody ranked very highly in total EPA, essentially, right? So basically, how good was the team's offense?
All I'm gonna say is the nerds who looked at that.
Yes.
The nerds. I say that it's an endearing term.
It's not.
Should also just look at, have you tested the same thing against, say, passer rating?
Yeah. Well,
because I think passer rating would give you the same results. I'm not saying it's a better stat. I'm just saying.
Yes.
The implication, really quick. The implication there is that the voters understand EPA, use EPA, in that that's the driver. When the reality is, they understand passer rating. They look at passer rating and touchdown to interception ratio, which is the biggest driver of passer rating. And passer rating is probably the thing that gets you there more than anything else, or as much as EPA. So carry on.
I don't know if it's even that complicated. I think it's just sort of saying that this particular statistic essentially is articulating the thing that voters are using, which is who's at the helm of the best offense, who happens to win. Like, I think you could predict MVP by looking at like 2 or 3 very, very blunt parameters, which is the quarterback of a very good offense who has won enough games. Because those are the only 2 things we're looking for here.
Yeah.
If you win 10-plus games and your offense ranks in the top 3 of the NFL, you're probably MVP.
Yeah, you're in the mix.
Right. Anyway, the point being, at various points through the first 8-9 games of the season, there was a front runner for this, but then every one of those front runners had a couple of games where they played badly.
Yeah.
So Brock Purdy for a while was like running away with total EPA, and then Brock Purdy had a couple of bad games, and now people are like, is Brock Purdy even good anymore? Josh Allen was right up at the sharp end, but Josh Allen had the meltdown in week 1 against the Jets, and then Josh Allen threw an interception and was outdueled by Joe Burrow against the Bengals on Sunday night. Tua has been right at the sharp end of this thing, but the Dolphins' offense runs off the rails every time they run up against a good defense. So Tua's shine is washing off. Jalen Hurts has been pretty good, but not even as good as he was last year. It seems hard to make a case for MVP for him. Mahomes, that offense has not been firing. Like, there isn't a clear MVP candidate, honestly.
Was 09 was the year Peyton won, I think, MVP?
Okay.
But Drew Brees, like the last time passer rating wasn't the biggest driver was 2009. When Brees led the league in passer rating, led the league in touchdowns, and apparently because he never got an MVP vote. Is that right, Brees? Was that a thing? He never won MVP. He probably got a vote because we would hear more about that, like the Russell Wilson thing. I mean, it's literally it's been passer rating every year except when Lamar was 3rd in his year and Cam was like 6th or 7th. But both of those guys added so much rushing value.
Breeze got 7.5 votes that year.
7.5 votes. But Peyton won MVP?
Yep.
Yeah, probably should have been Breeze that year. Anyway, so yeah, that was that's including regular and postseason, but it doesn't matter. It's passer ratings right up there. This would be one of those years, though, if you're looking for other
Favre of that year.
But like, so everybody expected Mahomes to be the favorite this year. He still has this opportunity to play the Bills, the Bengals. Like all of these guys have big games. Joe Burrow's already thrown his name in the mix now because people might, at the end of the day, say, okay, if Burrow just continues this run, he's been the highest graded quarterback over the last 3 weeks. If Burrow continues his run, he'll be right there in the mix. He gets to play the Ravens, the Chiefs.
I mean, my point is, I don't think there's a good MVP candidate in the first half of the season. I imagine one will emerge with double the sample size, essentially. But right now, you can make a case for half a dozen guys, and I don't think any of them are particularly compelling versus the others.
Because of that, if you're talking right now, is there a case for A.J. Brown or Tyreek Hill?
There's as strong a case as you can ever construct for a non-quarterback because there's no good quarterback case at the moment.
Yeah.
Or the best quarterback cases that you can make at the moment are the ones that that won't win because they don't have the stats or the whatever.
Well, the argument here would be, okay, if all those guys that we listed, is there a huge difference between the top 8 or 10 quarterbacks right now? But is there a huge difference between what A.J. Brown and Tyreek Hill have added to their respective offenses? Like that would be where the case comes from.
Yes.
And then from a defensive perspective, you could say, okay, is Myles Garrett in this mix? I don't know if the traditional voters would view him in the same lens that we are. I mean, he's in the middle of an historic season, and so he was our defensive player of the year option. But Garrett's in the middle of an incredible season, on pace to break PFF records of domination for a defense that's putting up ridiculous numbers in Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's ever a defensive case, maybe it's this year. We have him with 10 sacks. I don't know what the NFL has, but that's not like on paper. There's 4 guys with 10 PFF sacks. Again, I don't know what the NFL has there, but that's probably not enough to separate Garrett right now because he's one of 4 that have that many sacks.
Yeah. No, I find it tough. I mean, my my feelings on the MVP award have been fairly well established. But as long as we are factoring in value, it's very difficult to see how it can go to anybody other than a quarterback. But this is as close an argument as you can make now because we're halfway through the season. There is no obvious quarterback candidate. Where there are 2 very obvious wide receiver candidates that are crushing it in terms of the value that they're bringing to their teams, to the point where you can say which is more important, Tua or Tyreek Hill, which is more important, Jalen Hurts struggling through his injuries or A.J. Brown, which is where he goes every time he's in a tight spot. You could make that case at least. I don't know that it's a tremendously compelling one, but you're closer to being able to convince somebody now than you will ever be at the end of the season.
Yeah, the Jalen Hurts and Tua both had massive breakout seasons last year that coincided with A.J. Brown and Tyreek Hill being there.
Right.
And we hear from the Tua people, right? Nobody ever blamed Patrick Mahomes for having Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce. Nobody ever blamed Brady for having Moss or Peyton for having Marvin Harrison or whoever you want to mention. I think the difference there is we've seen with Mahomes it's a little different because he stepped right into it, but like with Brady or Manning or Breeze or Rodgers, like we saw a high baseline of play no matter who they had pretty much. But when they did get the top guys, then it's like, all right, now you're winning MVPs and going to Super Bowls. The problem with Jalen Hurts and Tua, why we want to give so much credit to the receiver, is like Tua was averaging 6 yards per attempt, right? Tua was doing nothing very good in the NFL other than pretty decent win-loss record, right? Was not playing very well. Not a good offense. And then he got Mike McDaniel and Tyreek Hill, and things went, through the roof. Jalen Hurts, not great. He was okay. Led the team to the playoffs. Like he played pretty well. But then he became an MVP candidate. Got MVP votes the next year when A.J. Brown showed up. Like that's the A/B analysis we're doing with the 2 former Bama guys. I
always thought it was quite a neat statistical quirk along those lines that in 2007, Tom Brady's career single season touchdown number jumped by the exact number of touchdowns Randy Moss brought to the table. Like he increased his previous best by 23 touchdowns, which is the number Moss got that year. In terms of like, hey, how much impact does an elite number one wide receiver have? I just thought that was always a neat.
These 23 touchdowns.
Right. It turns out he has 23 touchdowns impact on Tom Brady's best season. Okay, well, we've been saying there is no obvious quarterback candidate. Dan O, however, would point out that C.J. Stroud is now an obvious MVP candidate. 14 touchdowns, 1 interception. He's the obvious MVP, Stephen.
He didn't say that. He said he's in the discussion. Like, I don't think it's crazy because they're all in the discussion.
It's not crazy because there's no obvious one.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, it goes back to how much the credit pie and everything. Mm-hmm. The Texans, playmakers, like is Nico Collins playing well? Is Dalton Schultz playing well? Like, are they doing good things on the field? Yes. They hadn't. I mean, Schultz was like a good possession guy in Dallas. Nico Collins was a fine number 3 receiver with some potential. See, and Noah Brown going off on Sunday. How much is C.J. Stroud unlocking some of these guys right now? In addition to Bobby Slowick, not just because he's our friend, but he's like the latest rendition of the Shanahan tree going and elevating quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to recuse myself of C.J. Stroud analysis because of my priors, but I think we can
forget the priors for a minute because it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter.
I think we can say that C.J. Stroud is playing extremely well without saying he's MVP. Like his numbers, he's not playing as well as the numbers say, right? The numbers are 14 touchdowns, 1 interception, like and 8.1 yards per attempt. Those are like league-leading numbers. But even in terms of PFF grade, there is like 15 grading points between Tua and C.J. Stroud. So if you were looking at box score numbers and 14 touchdowns, 1 pick, passer rating, yards per attempt, whatever the number is you want to look at, you would say, wow, C.J. Stroud has as strong a case as anybody. Those numbers are literally unmatched. Nobody else has a 14-to-1 touchdown interception ratio, but the grade is nowhere near that. He has 8 turnover-worthy plays. Now, he's thrown the ball more than most people, so he doesn't have a bad turnover-worthy play rate. But 8 turnover-worthy plays, 1 interception.
But it's not summed up in the 1 interception.
Right.
That was what I was saying about Mahomes a couple of years ago. He was like 25-1 halfway through the season, and I was like, well, the 1 could easily be 9.
Right. I mean,
that's
Josh
not
Allen,
the thing to look at.
Josh Allen has the same 8 turnover-worthy plays, but he has 9 interceptions.
Yeah.
Like sometimes the numbers don't necessarily track with where they should. So
Stroud's breakdown is interesting too.
And it's come, by the way, like what's the last thing you saw? Shouty show approach, right?
It was unbelievable.
The last
thing
we saw
on Sunday.
Yeah, the last thing we saw was the best game of his career and one of the best games of any quarterback in this season. So if all you care about is the last 72 hours worth of information, yes, C.J. Stroud is MVP. If, however, you're looking at 8 or 9 games, you're like, no, he's not.
Well, yeah, Stroud has 3 other PFF grades under 60. Just the previous week, he lost to the Panthers. They lost to the Panthers, right? And he got outplayed by Bryce Young, who has not been good this year. I mean, that's the last thing we saw from Stroud, though, was outstanding. And so, yeah, there is a way to say very impressed by Stroud. Unbelievable rookie season so far. Probably wouldn't put him in the MVP conversation, but I kind of get where that discussion's going because Houston was picking number 2 overall, doing nothing. And where most quarterbacks come in and struggle because they went to a bad team, C.J. Stroud is coming in, and him plus Bobby, the scheme, elevating this entire group. Like, they shouldn't have a good offensive line. They shouldn't have a group of playmakers who are like, man, how are we going to cover all these dudes now? How are we going to cover Tank Dell and Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz? They shouldn't be doing that, but they are under Stroud. This is the nature of the midseason MVP stuff, though. Remember 2 years ago, Jonathan Taylor had a 4-touchdown game, and everybody's like, well, maybe Jonathan Taylor should be the most valuable player because I just saw him score 4 touchdowns and beat the Bills, who were really good that year. And maybe it's Jonathan Taylor. And that's the problem with the whole MVP thing. Like, if you didn't think the guy was the MVP the first 8 weeks, whatever he did in week 9 should not change your opinion, right? Nobody was like, man, Jonathan Taylor's MVP through 8 weeks. But in week 9, he's got to be the MVP. He just scored 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, so when you're dealing with, and this is just another rule why MVP is stupid, but if you're in the world of small sample size for MVP, like, hey, who's the first quarter MVP? Who's the first half MVP? I don't think one game can win you that award. But I think one game can be disqualifying. Like if you've had 5 games and one of them was awful, you probably can't be MVP because that's 20% of your season has been bad.
I mean, we saw Rodgers have absolute duds for games and
but I
win
think
it twice.
Over a season, maybe. But over a quarter, no, absolutely not. Over half, probably not. The smaller the sample size, the more disqualifying those bad games are.
The one other thing about MVP that I'll say, a lot of people treat it like this horse race or whatever. We're like, this guy's first, this guy's second, this guy's third, and they're all neck and neck. When sometimes that's not the case. I think right now that is the case. Like if Tua goes and balls out or Mahomes goes and balls out, you could be like, oh, he's vaulted back to the top. That makes sense. But there's other times where the leader is so far in front, like don't switch them week to week. Like the leader can be in front for 3 straight weeks because he's so far ahead. We don't necessarily have that going on right now. Some of the other awards Gordon went to, Offensive Player of the Year gives to Tyreek Hill from the Dolphins. I think Tyreek or A.J. Brown both have that strong case. Mm-hmm. Defensive Player of the Year, Myles Garrett. And Offensive Rookie of the Year, C.J. Stroud. I'm good with that. I think that makes sense. Defensive Rookie of the Year, Jalen Carter of the Eagles.
Yep. Defense Player of the Year is just going to be an absolute titanic battle all the way through the season. I mean, Myles Garrett is the guy for us. You can make a pretty strong case for like 6 different guys, and I don't think any of them anything is wrong. Like if you said Max Crosby, Defensive Player of the Year, sure. T.J. Watt, Dexter Lawrence, Micah Parsons, Nick Bosa, any of those guys have a pretty strong case. Like it's insane how strong the field is for Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, the Dexter Lawrence one's interesting. He's coming off of a rough game relative to what he had been doing. No pressures last week.
Right.
After having 15.
Yeah.
But he's still sitting there with 44 pressures.
For a nose tackle.
For a nose tackle, right? On pace.
He has the same number of pressures as Nick Bosa.
Yeah, that's absolutely insane. From a real voting standpoint, people will still look at sack totals and they'll look at team defense impact. And there's no way at the end of the year that they're looking at the Giants defense being like, man, Dexter Lawrence, and he's the leader of this great defense. That'll probably disqualify him with real voters, but he deserves a shout out. 92.3 overall grade, 92.2 pass rush grade at a position that is easier to double, more difficult to get pressure, and he's on pace for 80-plus pressures this year at nose tackle, which is crazy. That is a crazy number. That's a very good number for an edge rusher. It's a very good number for any interior defensive lineman, outstanding number for any interior defensive lineman. It's out of this world for a guy who does line up predominantly straight over the center.
Yep, it's crazy.
Zero tech.